It is not madness that I have uttered, bring me to the test, and I the matter will reword, which madness would. Gamble from Hamlet. As Mr. Sampson crossed the hall with a bewildered look, Mrs. Allen, the good housekeeper, who, with the reverent attention which is usually rendered to the clergy in Scotland, was on the watch for his return, sallied forth to meet him. What's this out now, Mr. Sampson? This is more than ever. Ye'll really do yourself some injury why these lang fasts, naething's assay hurtful to the stomach, Mr. Sampson. If ye would but put some peppermint drops in your pocket, or let Barnes cut ye a sandwich. Avoid thee, quoth the Dominie, his mind running still upon his interview with Meg Merrilies, and making for the dining parlour. Nah, ye needna gang in there, the cloth's been removed an hour syne, and the Colonel's at his wine, but just step into my room, I have a nice steak that the cook will do in a moment. Exerciso te, said Sampson, that is, I have dined. Dined? It's impossible, wha can ye hae dined why, you that gangs out nae gate? With Beelzebub, I believe, said the minister. Nah, then he's bewitched for certain, said the housekeeper, letting go her hold, he's bewitched, or he's daft, and ony way the Colonel maun just guide him his ain gate, ways me. Heck, sirs. It's a sair thing to see learning bring folk to this. And with this compassionate ejaculation, she retreated into her own premises. The object of her commiseration had by this time entered the dining parlour, where his appearance gave great surprise. He was mud up to the shoulders, and the natural paleness of his hue was twice as cadaverous as usual, through terror, fatigue, and perturbation of mind. What on earth is the meaning of this, Mr. Sampson? Said Mannering, who observed Miss Bertram looking much alarmed for her simple but attached friend. Exorceso, said the Dominie. How, sir? Replied the astonished Colonel. I crave pardon, honourable sir. But my wits are gone a wool-gathering, I think. Pray, Mr. Sampson, collect yourself, and let me know the meaning of all this. Sampson was about to reply, but finding his Latin formula of exorcism still came most readily to his tongue, he prudently desisted from the attempt, and put the scrap of paper which he had received from the gypsy into Mannering's hand, who broke the seal and read it with surprise. This seems to be some jest, he said, and a very dull one. It came from no jesting person, said Mr. Sampson. From whom then did it come? Demanded Mannering. The Dominie, who often displayed some delicacy of recollection in cases where Miss Bertram had an interest, remembered the painful circumstances connected with Meg Merrilies, looked at the young ladies, and remained silent. We will join you at the tea-table in an instant, Julia, said the Colonel. I see that Mr. Sampson wishes to speak to me alone, and now they are gone. What, in heaven's name, Mr. Sampson, is the meaning of all this? It may be a message from heaven, said the Dominie, but it came by Beelzebub's postmistress. It was that which, Meg Merrilies, who should have been burned with a tar barrel 20 years since, for a harlot, thief, witch, and gypsy. Are you sure it was she? Said the Colonel with great interest. Sure, honoured sir, of a truth she is one not to be forgotten, the like o' Meg Merrilies is not to be seen in any land. The Colonel paced the room rapidly, cogitating with himself. To send out to apprehend her, but it is too distant to send to Macmorlan, and Sir Robert Hazelwood is a pompous coxcomb, besides the chance of not finding her upon the spot, or that the humour of silence that seized her, before may again return. No, I will not, to save being thought a fool, neglect the course she points out. Many of her class set out by being impostors, and end by becoming enthusiasts, or hold a kind of darkling conduct between both lines, unconscious almost when they are cheating themselves, or when imposing on others. Well, my course is a plain one at any rate, and if my efforts are fruitless, it shall not be owing to over-jealousy of my own character for wisdom. With this he rang the bell, and ordering Barnes into his private sitting-room, gave him some orders, with the result of which the reader may be made hereafter acquainted. We must now take up another adventure, which is also to be woven into the story of this remarkable day. Charles Hazelwood had not ventured to make a visit at Woodbourne during the absence of the Colonel. Indeed, Mannering's whole behavior had impressed upon him an opinion that this would be disagreeable, and such was the ascendancy which the successful soldier and accomplished gentleman had attained over the young man's conduct, that in no respect would he have ventured to offend him. He saw, or thought he saw, in Colonel Mannering's general conduct, an approbation of his attachment to Miss Bertram. But then he saw still more plainly the impropriety of any attempt at a private correspondence, of which his parents could not be supposed to approve, and he respected this barrier interposed betwixt them, both on Mannering's account, and as he was the liberal and zealous protector of Miss Bertram. "No," said he to himself, "I will not endanger the comfort of my Lucy's present retreat, until I can offer her a home of her own." With this valorous resolution, which he maintained, although his horse, from constant habit, turned his head down the avenue of Woodbourne, and although he himself passed the lodge twice every day, Charles Hazelwood withstood a strong inclination to ride down, just to ask how the young ladies were, and whether he could be of any service to them during Colonel Mannering's absence. But on the second occasion he felt the temptation so severe, that he resolved not to expose himself to it a third time, and, contenting himself with sending hopes and inquiries, and so forth, to Woodbourne, he resolved to make a visit long promised to a family at some distance, and to return in such time as to be one of the earliest among Mannering's visitors, who should congratulate his safe arrival from his distant and hazardous expedition to Edinburgh. Accordingly, he made out his visit, and having arranged matters so as to be informed within a few hours after Colonel Mannering reached home, he finally resolved to take leave of the friends with whom he had spent the intervening time, with the intention of dining at Woodbourne, where he was in a great measure domesticated, and this, for he thought much more deeply on the subject than was necessary, would, he flattered himself, appear a simple, natural, and easy mode of conducting himself. Fate, however, of which lovers make so many complaints, was, in this case, unfavorable to Charles Hazelwood. His horse's shoes required an alteration, in consequence of the fresh weather having decidedly commenced. The lady of the house, where he was a visitor, chose to indulge in her own room till a very late breakfast hour. His friend also insisted on showing him a litter of puppies, which his favorite pointer bitch had produced that morning. The colors had occasioned some doubts about the paternity, a weighty question of legitimacy, to the decision of which Hazelwood's opinion was called in as arbiter between his friend and his groom, and which inferred in its consequences, which of the litter should be drowned, which saved. Besides, the laird himself delayed our young lover's departure for a considerable time, endeavoring, with long and superfluous rhetoric, to insinuate to Sir Robert Hazelwood, through the medium of his son, his own particular ideas respecting the line of a meditated turnpike road. It is greatly to the shame of our young lover's apprehension that after the 10th reiterated account of the matter, he could not see the advantage to be obtained by the proposed road passing over the Langhurst, Windino, the Goodhouse Bark, Halseycroft, and then crossing the river at Simonspool, and so by the road to Kippletringan, and the less eligible line pointed out by the English surveyor, which would go clear through the main enclosures at Hazelwood, and cut within a mile, or nearly so, of the house itself, destroying the privacy and pleasure, as his informer contended, of the grounds. In short, the adviser, whose actual interest was to have the bridge built as near as possible to a farm of his own, failed in every effort to attract young Hazelwood's attention, until he mentioned by chance that the proposed line was favored by that fellow Glosson, who pretended to take a lead in the county. On a sudden young Hazelwood became attentive and interested, and having satisfied himself which was the line that Glosson patronized, assured his friend it should not be his fault if his father did not countenance any other instead of that. But these various interruptions consumed the morning. Hazelwood got on horseback at least 3 hours later than he intended, and, cursing fine ladies, pointers, puppies, and turnpike acts of Parliament, saw himself detained beyond the time when he could, with propriety, intrude upon the family at Woodbourne. He had passed, therefore, the turn of the road which led to that mansion, only edified by the distant appearance of the blue smoke, curling against the pale sky of the winter evening, when he thought he beheld the dominie taking a footpath for the house through the woods. He called after him, but in vain, for that honest gentleman, never the most susceptible of extraneous impressions, had just that moment parted from Meg Merrilies, and was too deeply wrapped up in pondering upon her vaticinations, to make any answer to Hazelwood's call. He was, therefore, obliged to let him proceed without inquiry after the health of the young ladies, or any other fishing question, to which he might, by good chance, have had an answer returned wherein Miss Bertram's name might have been mentioned. All cause for haste was now over, and, slackening the reins upon his horse's neck, he permitted the animal to ascend at his own leisure the steep sandy track between two high banks, which, rising to a considerable height, commanded, at length, an extensive view of the neighboring country. Hazelwood was, however, so far from eagerly looking forward to this prospect, though it had the recommendation that great part of the land was his father's, and must necessarily be his own, that his head still turned backward towards the chimneys of Woodbourne, although at every step his horse made the difficulty of employing his eyes in that direction become greater. From the reverie in which he was sunk, he was suddenly roused by a voice too harsh to be called female, yet too shrill for a man. "What's kept you on the road a sae lang, mon ither folk do your work?" He looked up. The spokeswoman was very tall, had a voluminous handkerchief rolled round her head, grizzled hair flowing in elf-locks from beneath it, a long red cloak, and a staff in her band, headed with a sort of spear-point. It was, in short, Meg Merrilies. Hazelwood had never seen this remarkable figure before. He drew up his reins in astonishment at her appearance, and made a full stop. "I think," continued she, "they that hae ta'en interest in the house of Ellangowan sold sleep none this night. 3 men hae been seeking ye, and you are gone hame to sleep in your bed. D'ye think if the lad bairn F's, the sister will do weel?" "Na! Na! I don't understand you, good woman," said Hazelwood. "If you speak of Miss, I mean of any of the late Ellangowan family, tell me what I can do for them." "Of the late Ellangowan family," she answered with great vehemence, "of the late Ellangowan family. And when was there ever, or when will there ever be, a family of Ellangowan, but bearing the gallant name of the Bald Bertram?" "But what do you mean, good woman?" "I am nae good woman, the country kens I am bad enough, and baith they and I may be sorry enough that I am nae better. But I can do what good women canna, and dorna do. I can do what would freeze the blood o' them that is bred in bigot was, built walls, for naething but to bind bairns' heads, and to hap them in the cradle. Hear me, the guard's drawn off at the custom house at Portonferry, and it's brought up to Hazelwood House by your father's orders, because he thinks his house is to be attacked this night by the smugglers. There's naebody means to touch his house. He is good blood and gentle blood. I say little o' him for himself, but there's naebody thinks him worth meddling wi'. Send the horsemen back to their post, cannily, cautiously, and quietly, seein' they winna hae work the night. I will lay the guns will flash and the swords will glitter in the braw moon." "Good God! What do you mean?" said Hazelwood. "Your words and manner would persuade me you are mad, and yet there is a strange combination in what you say." "I am not mad," exclaimed the gypsy. "I have been imprisoned for mad, scourged for mad, banished for mad, but mad I am not. Hear ye, Charles Hazelwood of Hazelwood, d'ye bear malice against him that wounded you?" "No, dame, God forbid. My arm is quite well, and I have always said the shot was discharged by accident. I should be glad to tell the young man so himself." "Then do what I bid ye," answered Meg Merrilies, "and ye'll do him mair good than ever he did you ill, for if he was left to his ill-wishers he would be a bloody corpse ere morn, or a banished man. But there's ane abune, above, do as I bid you, send back the soldiers to Portonferry. There's nae mair fear o' Hazelwood House than there's o' Crufflefell." And she vanished with her usual celerity of pace. It would seem that the appearance of this female, and the mixture of frenzy and enthusiasm in her manner, seldom failed to produce the strongest impression upon those whom she addressed. Her words, though wild, were too plain and intelligible for actual madness, and yet too vehement and extravagant for sober-minded communication. She seemed acting under the influence of an imagination rather strongly excited than deranged, and it is wonderful how palpably the difference, in such cases, is impressed upon the mind of the auditor. This may account for the attention with which her strange and mysterious hints were heard and acted upon. It is certain, at least, that young Hazelwood was strongly impressed by her sudden appearance and imperative tone. He rode to Hazelwood at a brisk pace. It had been dark for some time before he reached the house, and on his arrival there, he saw a confirmation of what the Sibyl had hinted. 30 dragoon horses stood under a shed near the offices, with their bridles linked together. 3 or 4 soldiers attended as a guard, while others stamped up and down with their long broadswords and heavy boots in front of the house. Hazelwood asked a non-commissioned officer from whence they came. From Porton Ferry. Had they left any guard there? No, they had been drawn off by order of Sir Robert Hazelwood for defence of his house, against an attack which was threatened by the smugglers. Charles Hazelwood instantly went in quest of his father, and, having paid his respects to him upon his return, requested to know upon what account he had thought it necessary to send for a military escort. Sir Robert assured his son in reply that from the information, intelligence, and tidings which had been communicated to and laid before him, he had the deepest reason to believe, credit, and be convinced that a riotous assault would that night be attempted and perpetrated against Hazelwood House by a set of smugglers, gypsies, and other desperadoes. And what, my dear sir, said his son, should direct the fury of such persons against ours rather than any other house in the country? I should rather think, suppose, and be of opinion, sir, answered Sir Robert, with deference to your wisdom and experience, that on these occasions and times, the vengeance of such persons is directed or levelled against the most important and distinguished in point of rank, talent, birth, and situation, who have checked, interfered with, and discountenanced their unlawful and illegal and criminal actions or deeds. Young Hazelwood, who knew his father's foible, answered, that the cause of his surprise did not lie where Sir Robert apprehended, but that he only wondered they should think of attacking a house where there were so many servants, and where a signal to the neighbouring tenants could call in such strong assistance, and added that he doubted much whether the reputation of the family would not in some degree suffer from calling soldiers from their duty at the custom house, to protect them, as if they were not sufficiently strong to defend themselves upon any ordinary occasion. He even hinted that in case their house's enemies should observe that this precaution had been taken unnecessarily, there would be no end of their sarcasms. Sir Robert Hazelwood was rather puzzled at this intimation, for, like most dull men, he heartily hated and feared ridicule. He gathered himself up, and looked with a sort of pompous embarrassment, as if he wished to be thought to despise the opinion of the public, which in reality he dreaded. I really should have thought, he said, that the injury which had already been aimed at my house in your person, being the next heir and representative of the Hazelwood family, failing me, I should have thought and believed, I say, that this would have justified me sufficiently in the eyes of the most respectable and the greater part of the people, for taking such precautions as are calculated to prevent and impede a repetition of outrage. Really, sir, said Charles, I must remind you of what I have often said before, that I am positive the discharge of the piece was accidental. Sir, it was not accidental, said his father angrily, but you will be wiser than your elders. Really, sir, replied Hazelwood, in what so intimately concerns myself. Sir, it does not concern you, but in a very secondary degree, that is, it does not concern you, as a giddy young fellow, who takes pleasure in contradicting his father, but it concerns the country, sir, and the county, sir, and the public, sir, and the kingdom of Scotland, in so far as the interest of the Hazelwood family, sir, is committed, and interested, and put in peril, in, by, and through you, sir. And the fellow is in safe custody, and Mr. Glosson thinks. Mr. Glosson, sir? Yes, sir, the gentleman who has purchased Ellangowan, you know who. I mean, I suppose? Yes, sir, answered the young man, but I should hardly have expected to hear you quote such authority. Why, this fellow, all the world knows him to be sordid, mean, tricking, and I suspect him to be worse. And you yourself, my dear sir, when did you call such a person a gentleman in your life before? Why, Charles, I did not mean gentleman in the precise sense and meaning, and restricted and proper use, to which, no doubt, the phrase ought legitimately to be confined, but I meant to use it relatively, as marking something of that state to which he has elevated and raised himself, as designing, in short, a decent and wealthy and estimable sort of a person. Allow me to ask, sir, said Charles, if it was by this man's orders that the guard was drawn from Porton Ferry? Sir, replied the baronet, I do apprehend that Mr. Glosson would not presume to give orders, or even an opinion, unless asked, in a matter in which Hazelwood House and the house of Hazelwood, meaning by the one this mansion house of my family, and by the other, typically, metaphorically, and parabolically, the family itself, I say then where the house of Hazelwood, or Hazelwood House, was so immediately concerned. I presume, however, sir, said the son, this Glosson approved of the proposal? Sir, replied his father, I thought it decent and right and proper to consult him as the nearest magistrate, as soon as report of the intended outrage reached my ears, and although he declined, out of deference and respect, as became our relative situations, to concur in the order, yet he did entirely approve of my arrangement. At this moment a horse's feet were heard coming very fast up the avenue. In a few minutes the door opened, and Mr. Macmorland presented himself. I am under great concern to intrude, Sir Robert, but— Give me leave, Mr. Macmorland, said Sir Robert, with a gracious flourish of welcome. This is no intrusion, sir, for your situation is sheriff substitute calling upon you to attend to the peace of the county, and you, doubtless, feeling yourself particularly called upon to protect Hazelwood House, you have an acknowledged, and admitted, an undeniable right, sir, to enter the house of the first gentleman in Scotland, uninvited, always presuming you to be called there by the duty of your office. It is indeed the duty of my office, said Macmorland, who waited with impatience an opportunity to speak, that makes me an intruder. No intrusion, reiterated the baronet, gracefully waving his hand. But permit me to say, Sir Robert, said the sheriff substitute, I do not come with the purpose of remaining here, but to recall these soldiers to Porton Ferry, and to assure you that I will answer for the safety of your house. To withdraw the guard from Hazelwood House, exclaimed the proprietor in mingled displeasure and surprise, and you will be answerable for it. And, pray, who are you, sir, that I should take your security, and caution, and pledge, official or personal, for the safety of Hazelwood House? I think, sir, and believe, sir, and am of opinion, sir, that if any one of these family pictures were deranged, or destroyed, or injured, it would be difficult for me to make up the loss upon the guarantee which you so obligingly offer me. In that case I shall be sorry for it, Sir Robert, answered the downright Macmorland, but I presume I may escape the pain of feeling my conduct the cause of such irreparable loss, as I can assure you there will be no attempt upon Hazelwood House whatever, and I have received information which induces me to suspect that the rumor was put afloat merely in order to occasion the removal of the soldiers from Porton Ferry. And under this strong belief and conviction, I must exert my authority as sheriff and chief magistrate of police, to order the whole, or greater part of them, back again. I regret much, that by my accidental absence, a good deal of delay has already taken place, and we shall not now reach Porton Ferry until it is late. As Mr. Macmorland was the superior magistrate, and expressed himself peremptory in the purpose of acting as such, the baronet, though highly offended, could only say, Very well, sir, it is very well. Nay, sir, take them all with you, I am far from desiring any to be left here, sir. We, sir, can protect ourselves, sir. But you will have the goodness to observe, sir, that you are acting on your own proper risk, sir, and peril, sir, and responsibility, sir, if anything shall happen or befall to Hazelwood House, sir, or the inhabitants, sir, or to the furniture and paintings, sir. I am acting to the best of my judgment and information, Sir Robert, said Macmorland, and I must pray of you to believe so, and to pardon me accordingly. I beg you to observe it is no time for ceremony, it is already very late. But Sir Robert, without deigning to listen to his apologies, immediately employed himself with much parade in arming and arraying his domestics. Charles Hazelwood longed to accompany the military, which were about to depart for Portonferry, and which were now drawn up and mounted by direction and under the guidance of Mr. Macmorland, as the civil magistrate. But it would have given just pain and offence to his father to have left him at a moment when he conceived himself and his mansion house in danger. Young Hazelwood therefore gazed from a window with suppressed regret and displeasure, until he heard the officer give the word of command, from the right to the front, by files, MRCH. Leading file, to the right wheel, trot. The whole party of soldiers then getting into a sharp and uniform pace, were soon lost among the trees, and the noise of the hoofs died speedily away in the distance.